My name is Archie Vic. Today is Wednesday, October the 8th, 2003. And today I'm interviewing Mr. Colonel Hooks. And Mr. Hooks, if you'd go ahead and give me your full name.
I'm Archibald Reese Hooks, Jr., born Troy, North Carolina, September the 22nd, 1916.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you here today, sir.
Glad to be here.
If you would, just kind of tell me a little bit about how you actually got into the Army. I assume you were in the Army, correct?
I was in the Army, yes. I was a product of the draft, the lottery of 1940, and I received a notice as a result of my low number in that to report for a physical exam, Fort McPherson, Georgia, on April the 3rd, 1941. I did report. I took my physical. I passed, and 3 days later I was on a troop train with 250, 60 other people heading for Fort Eustis, Virginia for basic training.
At that time, was it, for you, is that difficult? Were you excited? What was your overall feeling about getting that draft notice?
I guess there were mixed emotions. I wasn't very interested in leaving my job, which I'd only had for about a year.
What were you doing?
I was in the brass and copper business, sales, industrial metals. I only worked for about a year after finishing Georgia Tech, and was really just getting started. So I wasn't too much interested in leaving. However, I understood it was for only a year at that time, and that I would be back. My company supported me in the decision, and so I was not happy, but I was not unhappy.
Were you scared?
No, I wasn't scared. There wasn't a lot to fear at that particular point.
What was going on in the world at that time that you were getting the draft notice?
I guess the biggest thing was that the country was coming out of the Great Depression. Jobs were beginning to become available. Economy was beginning to improve. Housing was being built, and it was just a general good feeling about the condition of the country as far as I was concerned. There were lots of problems as far as young people were concerned because of the stories we were hearing from Germany, from England, and the troubles that the British Empire and the German people were having as far as the potential for an overall war. I can remember in September of 1939, a group of we were all single fraternity brothers sitting around discussing the potential for going in to the service. They were talking about what might happen there, and there was some feeling there, but not I didn't feel a great deal of anxiety about it at that point.
Tell me, we had left off and you were on a troop train.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I tell you one story that was that I've told. It was quite interesting. When we got on the train at the terminal station in Atlanta, it was about a 24-hour trip in those days to Fort Eustis from here. We went through Richmond and changed trains there.
Was this
It was
in the winter, or is this what?
This was
time of
April.
year?
April, and it was an overnight trip, so there were Pullman cars available, and I thought I was being smart, and I asked for the lower berth and got in early and I found out later that the lower berth slept two people, the upper berth slept one. So I turned all night sleeping with a strange man in bed. That wasn't a lot of sleep involved.
I assume you were on your way to go to basic training.
Basic training at Fort Eustis. I had taken basic ROTC at Georgia Tech in the Coast Artillery, and I had indicated that on my forms, and they assigned me, strangely, the Army worked in a normal way, to a Coast Artillery outfit, which was basic training at Fort Eustis. And I went there for about 3 months for the basic training.
Was that hard?
It was a lot of hard work. It was it was a problem of sorts, in that the training people, this was early on in the draft, and the training people who did the training were regular Army people from prior to the wars and all, and some of it was tough to handle. We couldn't communicate too well with some of those, but it wasn't all that bad. It was busy. You had early hours and late hours, and there was a lot of manual work involved with it.
What did you think that, is there anything specific maybe that you struggled with or you found to be most difficult, or maybe something that happened there?
There were some things that I'd rather not talk a lot about, but it involved the mindset of the regular Army people, that I could not cope with their understanding of life and what they expected. For example, we had a barracks of about, I believe there were about 25 people in the barracks, and there was a staff sergeant in charge of the barracks.
Do you remember his name?
I don't remember his name, and I wouldn't tell you if I did, because
How old was he?
30, maybe 30 years old. Probably had been in the Army for, I don't know this, but I would say 10 years in order to be a staff sergeant. He expected us to wait on him a great deal, and he voiced his authority in sort of bad ways at times. He wanted us to buy him a radio, for one thing, so he would enjoy life better, and therefore we would enjoy life better. There were a few of those kinds of things that bothered me. I don't know that it bothered other people. It did bother me, but as far as treatment and everything else was concerned, I have no complaints. The training was good, and we learned. We worked on. I was assigned to a 155 millimeter long rifle battalion, and I was assigned to a battalion of 155 millimeter rifles. These are long range artillery pieces, and so our basic training was just basic military discipline and that sort of thing, plus the specialized training on the weapons and all. So it was interesting, and I enjoyed that.
Tell me a little bit about this. Was this a howitzer?
No, it was a rifle, which is the long. A howitzer is a shorter range weapon. The rifle, 150 millimeter rifle, is the long range. I think about 25-mile range on it.
And how many people? I guess you were assigned to a platoon. Is that correct?
I was assigned to a platoon and to a squad within the platoon.
And
Yes.
How many people in your platoon?
About 40, if I recall correctly. I'm not sure about it. It was 4 squads of about 10 people, plus the non-commissioned officers.
Do you have any particular friends tended to gravitate toward in your squad or in your platoon?
There were a few, but not close. There was no close ties. I did have one of my sergeants turned out to be a pretty good friend. I was my battery commander in this unit was a Georgia Tech graduate, and he saw my record as Georgia Tech and asked me if I would help this sergeant who was trying to go to an officer school in his mathematics and some of the. So I got a pretty good assignment as a result of working with him on that, and we got along pretty good.
Well, good.
But that was about the only one. It really wasn't a time for. We had, as I said earlier, long hours, and you were tired. And I didn't get into much as far as personal relationships in that unit.
Was that a time that you enjoyed? Did you enjoy learning to work with the weapon?
I won't say anything special. It was interesting. I mean, the fact that the mechanics and
Tell me a little bit about during that training, was there any in particular thing about the Army or the MOS that you had, the job you had? Was being in the military just a job, or was it exciting, or was it something that you just wanted to get through?
At that time, it was probably more just getting through, because that was prior to Pearl Harbor. I was in for a year.
That was before Pearl Harbor?
Yes, this was April of '41 when I was in draft. And we only were signing up for a year's service. So I just wanted to get my year behind me and whatever that involved. After the Pearl Harbor situation, it changed drastically.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. Do you remember where you were on?
Very vividly. I'll bring you up to it real fast. From that basic training, I was sent to Fort DuPont, Delaware for assignment to a Delaware National Guard unit, and they sent me with a special detachment down to Lewis, Delaware, which is on the entrance to Chesapeake Bay, and we worked with a Navy group there questioning shipping coming in and out of the monitoring, really is what we were doing, the shipping coming in and out. And on a Sunday afternoon, it happened to be a Sunday when I was off duty, and I was lying in a tent listening to a ball game of some sort on the radio.
And who was playing?
I can't remember the ball game. I just remember some sporting event on the radio. Obviously, we didn't have TV in those days, and all of a sudden they broke in and said that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. And within hours, this was an old Fort Lewis, I guess it was, Lewes, and it had been a harbor defense post, and it had 155 millimeter rifle emplacements all along there, and one of our jobs was trying to restore those. We had been working on them. The government had civilian people in there putting revetments and things around them and all, and within hours after that, we were issued live ammunition, and the activity around getting those guns back in order was amazing.
Wow.
Literally within hours. And so that's where I was at the time of announcement of Pearl Harbor.
And what was going through your mind at that time? Was that
well, that was different from that earlier time of just being drafted and what that meant. Now we realized we were in a war, and that first thing that that I thought about was that, well, my year is going to extend, and so I immediately thought of what I wanted to do. I had been drafted as a private, and at the time I was a corporal, and so I applied for OCS, Officer Candidate School, through the Delaware Division, but it was a National Guard division, and I got rejected week after week. They had, I guess it was at 2-week intervals. They had classes of OCS starting in the Coast Artillery. So I kept applying and got turned down. And one day my sergeant said, "Hooks, you've got an engineering degree. Why don't you apply for engineer OCS?" I applied, and 2 weeks later was accepted and went to OCS at Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Were you excited about that?
I was excited about that, yes.
What did that mean to you?
Well, it meant that I was two things, I guess. One, that I would have more responsibility, and two, that somebody felt that I was able to handle the responsibility. So I felt that was okay, and that I certainly, if I guess I had some ambition that I wanted to improve, and nothing wrong with privates and sergeants and corporals. You got to have them, but I was proud to be accepted, and so I went on through that. That was a 90-day. That was, they called them the 90-day wonders. The second lieutenants who came out of OCS.
Where was it?
Fort Belvoir, Virginia, right outside of Washington. It's the head of the Corps of Engineers schools and headquarters for Corps of Engineers in the U.S. Army.
Did you like the school? Or
I liked the school. It was extremely difficult. It was very taxing. The officers that ran the school were West Point or who had just completed these earlier courses. I was in the 4th class that went through. They had 3 classes prior to mine, and there were about 200 to 300 second lieutenants.
Did you make any friends in there?
Yes, some I still have.
Do you want to name them?
Jack Kennison, Bill Dennison, some that have, unfortunately at my age, most of these have gone on, so they're not around. But I did make some friends, and I was with Jack Kennison at one of our reunions just 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So he's still alive, and he was a good friend of mine.
Was there anything in particular that stands out in your mind about officer candidate school?
It's tough. It was a very rugged program.
What was hard? Can you remember a lot of it?
The discipline, you ran everywhere we went. We didn't walk anywhere. You had to run. The officers were very strict on military discipline. The problems we had, one of the big things they call us a 48-hour night problem, or day and night problem of field exercises. It lasted for 72 hours and was very strenuous with no sleep. It mainly physical and mental. The expectation of being kicked out because you didn't qualify or something was always there. We had people many who started off who never finished it, didn't make it. So there was a lot of mental and physical exertion on those.
So to complete that course, you felt pretty proud about it.
I did. I felt, and I've always felt proud about it. I thought anybody that completed that, I felt proud about because I thought it was very vigorous and under very trying circumstances, because obviously it affected our lives very, very much as to what we did.
During that time, was was there an additional sense of urgency, I guess, since the fact that Pearl Harbor had just been bombed, so the likelihood that you were going to war was very real?
It was already real because we had declared war at that time, and we were in a war. So yes, it was real. Yeah.
Did that make things difficult, or?
I don't think it made it any. Well, it obviously made it more difficult from a time when we were not in a declared war. We knew, as I said earlier, I'd expected to be in a year and get out and go back to work. Now I didn't know when the end would be and what the end would be. So
what was the next step after OCS?
It was very interesting, and this was a 17 second lieutenants from this OCS class were assigned to Fort Meade, Maryland, to organize the 387th Engineer Battalion. It was a paper unit, and in addition to these lieutenants, we had a captain who was a West Pointer who was a battalion commander.
What do you mean by paper unit?
It was a unit that was in the Army as on paper, but it had no people or anything with it. So it had been activated, and we had this West Pointer as a battalion commander. We had a few lieutenants, a couple of captains who were reservists who had been called into service, and we had the 17 second lieutenants from OCS, plus a number of second lieutenants who came from colleges right out of the ROTC units, and I think it was a total of about 46 officers and 1,150 enlisted men, and they sent in a cadre of non-commissioned officers who had training and all, and then all of the privates, the soldiers in the group, were from civilian life in New England, mainly from New York and New Jersey, I guess.
It looks like you had your work cut out for you.
We had we did. We were fortunate. We had good commanding officers who were used to discipline and who were strict and who had some good training behind them, that our basic training, although we were new officers that were running the sort of the guts of the thing, were given good advice and all. It showed up, this outfit, and I'll go into a little more detail later if you want, but this outfit we took out of civilian life. I say we, the officers trained them, and went overseas and went with them through the Italian and the African and Italian campaigns, and disbanded the unit after the Italian campaign. One of the few one unit that went from nearly 3 years intact all the way through, from a basic training to disbandment, which I thought was an interesting thing.
Me, in creating this battalion, what was your job? What was your overall goal? Did you build bridges?
We were a unique unit. We were not. The battalion name sort of designates a separate battalion. We were not assigned to any one unit. For an example, after we finished our basic training at Fort Meade, we were assigned to the Armored Division headquarters at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and moved to Kentucky, and our work there involved, the primary goal was to support the Armored Division training thing by building bridges and obstacle courses and engineering roads and things of that nature. But during that time, we also ran into some emergency situations. I was a company commander at that time, and my company was assigned for about a 2 weeks duty to go to Ohio to harvest corn that was being threatened by rainstorms. The corn was a necessary part of the military and the sustenance of the people, whatever, in that area, and they were having bad rainstorms, and the corn was not being harvested and all. And we took 250 men up in December in cold and wet and rainy weather in Ohio and harvested corn for 2 weeks. One of our companies went to the Ohio River outside of Cincinnati and dismantled a large suspension bridge, metal thing, to recover the steel to go back into war production stuff. One of our companies went to an old fort and dismantled a World War I post and dismantled it. So we did a variety of jobs like that. And we were at Fort Knox when we got orders to go overseas. And so that changed our assignment again. We were relieved from assignment to the Armored Force, and we're back on our own to train and stage and get ready to go overseas.
You were a leader, and in being a leader, taking on that role, going from civilian life to now being in charge of numerous people and responsibilities, was that something that you just sort of assumed or went into naturally, or was it something you had to learn?
I can't answer that totally. I suppose I had some inherent things that helped me. I had to learn a lot, and that from my Army training. I have never been one to oppose the disciplinary training in the Army. I think that in a military format is absolutely essential, and I think the disciplinary training instills in you something that you don't necessarily have without that sort of thing. I knew that I had certain things to do. I knew that the people, the men under me, had certain responsibilities, and I felt that the training for them and for me enabled both of us, or all of us, to do what we had. And I think that's the reason that we did as well as we did in the service. There are a lot of things you wondered how they ever got done, but I think that business of training, the discipline, when an order is given, you jump, not necessarily because you want to jump, but because you know that you've got to do it, trusting that the people above you have been trained properly too. So I think that helped me a lot. I don't know that I had anything. If you read back a little bit, I was 25 or 6 years old at this thing. We had I had $1 million+ worth of equipment that I was responsible for in the lives of 250 men. Well, so that's responsibility. And I was just one of millions of those 25-year-olds and less.
Well, tell me, you had just mentioned from the point where you all set up this unit, and then there were some other things that you had done within the United States, and then you were given orders. And take me from that point. I believe you were in Knoxville.
We were in Fort Knox, Kentucky.
And from that point, what happened next?
Well, things speeded up drastically. We had, every Army unit has a table of organization and equipment. The organization brings the men, the equipment brings all of the supplies and things that you're supposed to have in order to do whatever your mission might be. and during the civilian part, I mean the time at Fort Knox, we probably had 90+% of the men, but maybe 50% of the equipment. Equipment being Caterpillar tractors, trucks, weapons, all of the things that go to any kind of a military unit.
Why were you short? Was that just because of
We didn't have the need for them at that point in what we were doing. But as soon as we were given orders, the first order we got was to bring ourselves up to the table of operation and equipment. So we got the additional men we needed. We started bringing in supplies, and on some of them we had to start training people to use them. And we got a lot of supplies we had never even thought about getting. Nobody had paid much attention to them because they were unnecessary things, but it turned out to be useful later on. So that was the time of getting ready, being sure everything, the trucks were operational, all of our vehicles, the equipment. We had road graders, we had Caterpillar tractors, motorcycles, any Jeeps and everything we brought that had to be made ready. And then these were made ready and packed up crated for shipment. And then the units, of course, were brought up to as far as we were supposed to have 4 pair of underwear and 2 pair of socks. And people who wore glasses, as I did, were issued 2 pair of special glasses that were compatible with gas masks that could use with it. That were things that we hadn't had any need for at all. So we got all of that, and we were sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for staging. And I forget the time we were there, but it was a very short period of time, something of that nature, till we got everything, found our equipment and everything that was supposed to be loaded on the ship. And we boarded an Army transport, an old, well, it wasn't that old. It was it'd been in the service a good while, but it was not a piece of the Navy equipment. It was a U.S. Army transport, troop transport. It was nice in a way. It was interesting. The officers had quarters, staterooms sort of thing, but where they'd had 2 in them, normally they'd put extra bunks. There were 4 in there. The enlisted men slept in hammocks, as did the Navy people, and they had a mess hall where the men stood up. They had tables that were at chest height, and for a space factor, everybody, there were no chairs, and you stood up and ate. But the food was very good on the transport.
What was your favorite thing to eat?
Steaks. They had steaks on the thing, and I was young in those days. Steaks were important.
They had good desserts?
They had good desserts. They had fresh fruits, and they had vegetables that were. It was a very pleasant thing as far as food was concerned. As far as the accommodations and all, it was tight, and we were subject to lots of drills. When we left out of Staten Island, New York, and I guess it was the next day when we waked up in the Atlantic Ocean, that we were surrounded by a very large convoy, including battleships and destroyers, cruisers, and we went across with that until we got to almost to we didn't know where we were going until we got out on the sea.
When you first, I guess you said that you got out there, and then it wasn't until the morning that you came out. I guess you got up that morning and you saw all these battle cruisers. What was going through your mind? Was that impressive?
That was impressive and exciting. I mean, also a little gives you a little misgivings of why do we need all of this?
Right.
But then they told us, I guess a couple of days later, we got notice that we were going to Africa. And
what was your initial reaction when you heard that?
I don't really remember, but I don't remember anything unusual about it. I didn't know, except for what I'd heard of the African war down in the Egyptian area with the British and Rommel and those things. I didn't know too much about what was going on anyway, but and I didn't know where in Africa we were going. So we got almost to the Mediterranean and waked up another morning and looked out there, and there was no convoy. All the battleships, everything had gone except for a few miscellaneous ships. And of course, they understood what they were doing. We didn't know, but we were going into the Mediterranean at that time, and it was, I suppose, a protected area. Okay. So we didn't need the convoy. So we went on it, and we landed finally out and landed at Oran in North Africa. And
what was it like there?
Unusual. It was sort of like the movie Africa's Oran, and all the Moroccan kind of culture, the buildings and things, and what you would expect from seeing movies and reading National Geographics, things of that nature. It wasn't particularly unusual, and there was no active military. The only thing that in fighting sort of thing, the only thing we got into at that point was some air raids. We did. We were raided by air.
When was the first time you realized that you were going to war? That you saw, I guess, that what was the first thing that you saw real that let you know, hey, I'm in a war?
I guess first inkling was all those battleships, the battleship and all those cruisers and things out there. That was the biggest mass. Of course, it was Navy, but it was a mass of war vehicles. The first that I'd seen, other than like harvesting the corn and stuff like that, and building bridges and things. And then when we got into Oran, the first air raid we experienced was kind of a shocker to you. One of the things we had been told to do when we bivouacked was to dig us a foxhole to fall into. Well, after the air raid, the foxholes were dug deeper than they had been the first night. That was certainly a change. We got an awakening.
So you heard bombs go off and this sort of thing. You were actually being attacked by Germans?
German Air Force.
Did you see any planes?
They were night attacks.
Okay.
And
you heard the bombs?
And yes, and they were in our areas. We had some slight casualties, not anything of no deaths or anything at that point. Just shrapnel wounds and things like that.
So they were actually right on top of you, is that right?
Yeah, that area in Oran had some supply depots,
okay.
things. I guess that's what they were looking for. Yeah. And then they assigned a few of us to parts of our unit was sent up to Algiers and Tunis, and at that time the war with Rommel was still going on that area of Africa, but it was winding down. And before our units got up there, the Rommel was defeated in Africa, and so they were all turned around and sent back to Oran, and we were assigned to General Patton's 7th Army, and we found out later that we were staging to go to Sicily when he made the invasion of Sicily.
During this time, tell me a little bit more about it. Were there jobs that you were doing during this time?
We did a number of different kind of, I guess it'd be called just engineer tasks. Always road building. There's always roads to be maintained, and because of the military traffic, always tore up roads more than the normal traffic. So there was always road building. In some areas of bridges and things of that nature. Some specialized. We ran some depots, supply depots, furnishing engineer equipment and supplies to various units, and we built some prisoner of war stockades and for these troops that were coming, had been captured, German and Italian, had been captured in the African campaign. They were.
Do you remember the first? Did you ever see a German soldier?
Oh yes.
Do you remember the first time you ever saw German soldiers?
I guess the first one were in those prisoner of war camps. They were. Well, they were different. They had part of this was Rommel's Africa Corps, which were, as I understand it, as fine military people as troops and all as they've ever been. And some of them were just, the Italians were, there's a cliche, I think, Italians are for love, not war. And that was sort of, they didn't want to fight. They weren't interested in really fighting. But there was, just like people in any other thing, you're going to find arrogance, and you're going to find cowardice, and you're going to find different things that go on. They were just a conglomerate of folks.
Right. Do you remember, did they appear to be well in good health? They appear to be well, have the things they need, or well supplied, or were they bones and?
No, they were not bones. They had been Rommel's Africa Corps was the elite of the German army. Their supplies were far better than ours. For example, one of them gave me his mess kit. We had a stamped out spoon and a knife and a fork out of some sort of aluminum or some other metal. This thing from the German, the Africa Corps mess kit was a compact stainless steel knife, fork, and spoon that meshed together. Beautiful thing. And their tents where we had sticks, they had aluminum poles, and they were well equipped. There was no shortage as far as.
They were a formidable enemy.
They were. He nearly, as I understand, they had much trouble with him.
Did you ever see any combat in that area?
Not there. As I said, before we got up into Algiers-Tunis, the war was over there.
Okay.
But we went on into Italy.
Okay.
After that and that was, I don't know what you recall, but the Patton was and the British combined to go into various sides of Sicily, and we were with Patton's army, and during the time on the Mediterranean after we sailed from Oran, we were circling around waiting for whatever the date was they had decided, and the Italians supposedly capitulated, and they wanted to give up. So the American force under Patton was divided into two groups. The 7th Army with Patton, and General Mark Clark was brought in as commander of the 5th Army, which had been formed but not fully activated. And we separated. My unit was assigned to Clark's 5th Army to go into Italy, and we expected that we would just walk into Italy, but it didn't turn out that way. The Germans found out about what we were doing, and they met the assault forces at Salerno, and they had a tough time getting in. My unit was sent to go around the Salerno up above Naples, and we landed at Bagnoli, which is a little port north of Naples,
Right.
and went into Italy from there. And there wasn't much by the time the Germans had gone down south to the Salerno thing, so we got in behind them a little bit at Naples. But they had, when they left there, they had destroyed a lot of the, what do you call the trouble we're having, city functions and so forth.
Right.
Naples had a great big port,
Right.
And they, for example, they had sunk all of the shipping in the port to make it unusable for us. They had a railroad that ran up north. They had destroyed the railroad by going in and pulling up the railroad ties and blowing explosives to break the rails into those pieces of equipment and things. So we were assigned immediately to try to bring back, and it was very interesting. The port where we didn't have where the shipping was sunk, we just went in and chopped off all the top superstructure of all the vessels, laid planking on top of the ships, and made a new port. It extended out, and it worked very well. And it's something, expedient, fast to get our ships and supplies in there. And my company was assigned, I had a company at that time, was assigned to rebuild the railroad to up to headquarters of Cisterna.
That was pretty dangerous.
Well, it wasn't dangerous. It was exciting to get it done. The Germans had taken what looked like a great big plow and put it on the back end of a locomotive and pulled the ties in two. And they had put teller mines on all of the rails and blown them apart where they were bent. And so we had to go in and salvage. They had two lines running, and we went in and salvaged enough material out of the hole by cutting off, making short rails, short ties and things to get one line through so we could get
Take a long time?
about 30 days, 30 miles in 30 days. And then at that point we had companies that were building bridges, working at the port. I was on the railroad, and then I was reassigned. We had a new commanding officer come in for our battalion, and I was assigned as battalion supply officer, and he made a lot of changes in the assignments of company commanders to staff and things of that nature. And we got orders to go to Fifth Army headquarters for a new development, and it turned out to be the Anzio-Nettuno beachhead invasion. And I went up, I don't want to say fortunate, I went up with our commanding officer since I was involved with supplies at that time. And we got our orders to stage and get ready to go in to Anzio. And Anzio at that time, the biggest excitement that I remember on that was when my commanding officer and I were talking to the Fifth Army engineer who was giving us our instructions. He got between the two of us, and he never met us in our life, didn't know us from Adam, but he put his arm around each of us and says, "It doesn't look good." And though then I had some trepidation, I was concerned about what was going on.
Tell me about it.
But we went in. The Anzio operation was the Germans had stalled the land operation up through the middle of Italy at Monte Cassino, and they had not been the Allies had not been able to get through, and so the Anzio-Nettuno was around the back, to get around the back, and it was intended to go in behind between Rome and Cassino to cut off the Germans and make them get out of the Cassino area. Well, it turned out that the landing was not much of a problem. There were very few Germans in there. The ones that were there were vacationing. It turned out that was a rest area that they had used in the two little beach towns on the Mediterranean. And I didn't see. I was assigned to go in with the early group to reconnoiter for a bivouac area for our headquarters and supply dump. And I went into the beachhead at 2 o'clock in the morning riding on a tank full of 75 millimeter ammunition that was the only way I could get off. We went in on LST as far as we could, and then the tank got off, and I took two of my sergeants, and we went with the tank and went in on the beachhead, and we ran into no opposition at that point, and didn't even see anybody. So it was an easy landing, but the problem as far as the complexity of the thing was that the Germans had some reserve troops in northern Italy that our intelligence had not spotted, and they brought them in, and by the time we got established with lines on the beachhead, they had the opposition, and the Anzio beachhead was a nightmare for 4 months. We had 10 minutes. We had our biggest casualties in my unit, and
How many casualties did you have?
well, I don't have the whole figures,
No,
but
I mean, was it
but
10
but
or?
oh, it was more than more than that. We had a good many wounded. Best man in my wedding was killed. The captain was killed, and
What was his name?
good friend of mine, Sam Hutchison. He was
Can you tell me, were you with him when he was killed?
no. The beachhead was a very small operation. It was 8 miles long along the beach, and it was about 6 miles deep into the air. So we was on a little knob of land there. And
there a name for this battle?
Anzio-Nettuno was what Anzio-Nettuno beachhead operation, I guess is what it was called. And
So you guys were basically attacked by the Germans.
yeah, we were pinned down for 4 months, and this we had in the first 30 days over nearly 300 air raids on the little beachhead. They had, and on February, we went in on January the 22nd, and on February the 5th, the Germans had brought those divisions from northern Italy in to stop us in there and set up artillery. And on February 5th, they started artillery, round-the-clock artillery bombardment on the place.
What was that like for you?
That was unpleasant. It was,
Scary?
well, when things go on like that, you get accustomed to expecting that this is going to be. I guess the February the 5th, we had our most casualties at one particular time. We had a number of my friends, officer friends, who were killed, and a bunch of enlisted men killed and injured when that artillery stuff started out, and that shakes you up. We hadn't had much in the way of anything except what I said earlier of the minor casualties before. So it's
When you were, tell me a little bit about where you were in Anzio. Were you in a foxhole? Were you in a
I was battalion supply officer at that time, as I said, and we set up our headquarters on the beach because our major project was helping unload shipping supplies coming in. We established the port there, and they helped with the unloading of supplies as the LSTs and things brought equipment, people, and everything.
And you were doing this while being attacked.
Yes. Yeah, we had a number. That port was a target area because in that time when we had the air raids and all, and the Germans brought shipping in around and fired from Navy guns into the port area there. Well, we set up our headquarters in the basement of I guess 4 or 5 story apartment building that was right on the couple of blocks off of the beach. There were a number of of groups that had, if you've seen some of the pictures of the Italian coastline, there's a lot of those stone-looking buildings that are 3 or 4, 5, 6 stories high. One area we had a company that was set up. It was the headquarters in a wine cave that was in the side of a hill, and it was a well-protected place for artillery thing. There were others. I don't know whether you remember Ernie Pyle or not, but Ernie Pyle and a group of
Did you ever see Ernie Powell?
I didn't see him, but he was bivouacked in his group of media folks, usually writers at that time, were in the building right across the street from where we were. I didn't see him. I knew he was there and all. But they had a bunch of Quentin Reynolds from one of the New York papers. Well, I remember him writing an article about that.
Do you remember during this time seeing the enemy besides, I mean, as far as infantry? Did you ever see the infantry?
The only infantry I saw was on with the dead ones who were left as we went through areas, which isn't so pleasant. But the Anzio operation was, I guess, the biggest concentrated thing that I was involved in. After Anzio, we sort of moved fast up the Italian peninsula. But at Anzio, there were a lot of casualties. There was what was it? I forget the colonel's name who formed the 1st Ranger Battalion. It was brought in there a place. Cisterna was a little village halfway between the beachhead and the German.
Rangers?
No, it wasn't Darby's. But anyway, it was Darby. Yeah, Darby. He was. I think he had about 1,800 men in his unit, and they went in to try to capture that little town of Cisterna in there, and they were wiped out. It was a catastrophe. The Germans found out about it coming in and ambushed them, and I was in the headquarters at 3rd Army there when the word came back to Darby, who was there. He wasn't with the troops at that time. Who was there, and it was.
Do you ever remember seeing Darby?
Yes, I saw him. He was there, and he was just, in tears and all. It was because he lost. I think out of the whole, maybe 300 got back, and when we went through finally and broke out of the Anzio beachhead in May, there were still American soldiers, dead soldiers in that area, and piles of German dead. And it was a horrible thing. It must have been a terrible catastrophe at the time. But I was never exposed to enemy as hand-to-hand combat with an individual soldier. So,
Can you remember any things specific that during Anzio that may have happened that was a scary point, or maybe a fun point, or something in particular that sticks in your mind about that time?
Well, it was during the air raids, that constant air raid and all. You were careful where you went. The artillery shelling was in the early days of it, from the 5th maybe to the middle of February, a little later. It was intense artillery fire, and you were always aware of shells going off. One of the things that was sort of interesting but not very effective was the Germans had, they were in the mountains about 8 miles away. They had a railroad artillery piece that was, I forget, it was 280 millimeter, which is around 12, 14-inch shell that it fired. It weighed a ton, and it was a beat-up piece of equipment. It was old and was worn, but it was a morale factor. And it was stuck in a cave in the mountain during most of the time, and they would wheel it out with the locomotives and fire it one time a day. And the rifling in it was worn. We found that out. I'll tell you in a minute. And you could almost hear the shell. It fluttered like a bird's wings fluttering coming. When you knew, of course, the sound came later, but you could hear the fluttering, a projectile coming in. And we later caught the Air Force when they pulled out. They had taken that train. It was a whole train, had the gun in there and railroad cars for the troops and the ammunition, and at a town called Chesapeake on the coast. And the Air Force had seen it and had bombed the rails at both ends of the train, and the train was sitting intact when we went through after leaving. We saw the gun after. It was in there. It was interesting to see the size of it, and I have a picture of it at home. It was an interesting one, but didn't do much damage. One of the projectiles exploded over our area one day and into the street. One of the pieces of shrapnel, which was probably 2 feet long and a foot wide, maybe 2 inches thick, fell, and it had the rifling. You could see where it didn't fit all the way across. It had holes in it in that 2-foot piece, so that's why you were getting that fluttering. We found that one.
Well, tell me, we want to kind of wrap this up. Tell me a little bit about, at this point, when did your term in the military sort of start to end?
Well, the war was over in Italy. They signed a peace thing in April of 1945, I guess it was, and
But that was exciting.
it was exciting, and most of the troops were dispersed to other areas. So our unit, the 387th, was when we were disbanded, and some of our troops went on ships directly to the Pacific. Some went back to the United States. I was assigned to a special engineer depot that was headquartered in Verona, Italy, and my job was to get engineer supplies that the Germans had left in northern Italy. I was assigned a 450-man American unit with 7 American officers and a 1,500-man intact German prisoner of war battalion. And we sent out groups of Germans, 150 Germans and 50 of the Americans, to these various places in northern Italy, and would rehabilitate or get rehabilitable items, engineer items, bring them back to Verona, put them in a warehouse, and then bring them up to standards that could be usable and give to the Italian people, to bring generators and batteries and any lumber and equipment that they could use in rehabilitating Italy. So I stayed there for 6 months when I should have been coming home, which was not pleasant. It was an interesting assignment because I got to see a lot of northern Italy, but I wanted to come home. I'd been over there 32 months or 30-something months. And finally, I got orders to turn that group over to a British unit, and I was given orders to come home. I went to Genoa, got on a Liberty ship, and came back home in November of 45. And I was discharged in February of 46. And my military career, except for reserve duty later, ended at that point. So
Your overall experience in World War tell me, how would you sum it up, your experience?
Well, interesting. It was interesting. As I said, I learned a lot about people, the discipline in the Army, how people react to emergency kind of situations. I think it affected my all of my life since, in that I don't get too excited about things that come up.
You don't sweat the small things.
Not the nitpicking is for somebody else, because there's a whole lot of things worse than the little things that we get excited about today.
It makes
You
you
know,
appreciate life.
very much. You appreciate life, family, friends. You learn to live with people that you had no contact with whatsoever, and probably not expect to have contact with. But it's a learning experience, and if you don't get mad about it, I think it's a helpful learning experience. Some people fight the projects,
Right.
and when you do that, you don't learn much from them. But that's my experience.
Is there anything you want to add?
I probably talked already more than I've talked in the 60 years.
I want to say,
Yeah.
on behalf of the Atlanta History Center and Library of Congress, that we truly appreciate your time and your sharing your what happened in World War II, and we truly appreciate it, and appreciate you coming here today. And
Thank you very much for having me. I think this is a great thing that you're doing for posterity. I hope somebody looks at some of this stuff and studies some of it and learns from it.
absolutely.